This evening, getting under the skin of the Ivy League, those 8 old, definitely distinguished colleges that are known for their ivy-covered buildings and their sometimes superior attitudes to other colleges and universities, which often gets under the skin of people who went elsewhere. Yale University is 300 years old this year, and were you to visit its campus, you would see that it still has exotic clubhouses, which look like tombs where Yale's legendary secret societies meet. Their prestige and importance have largely evaporated, but the rituals are still a secret. And so when we heard that some enterprising characters had managed to spy on the famous Skull and Bones Society, we couldn't resist. Here's ABC's Dan Harris.
The videotape provides a grainy glimpse into what appear to be the initiation rituals of a secret society that's been around since 1832, whose members have gone on to be leaders of Wall Street and the White House, the Senate and the Supreme Court.
They're sort of trying to scare the initiates, make them, disorient them, frighten them.
New York Observer investigative reporter Ron Rosenbaum accompanied a team of Yale students who shot these pictures 9 days ago. Rosenbaum's curiosity about Skull and Bones was permanently piqued when, as a classmate of George W. Bush, he lived right next to the Tomb, the group's heavily fortified home. From their perch, Rosenbaum and his cohorts taped the tomb's courtyard. What they captured, they say, was initiates, known as neophytes, being forced to kiss a skull, then members performing a mock killing. It may look like your average fraternity nonsense, but Rosenbaum says it's not.
Even though it may seem silly to us, it seems to mean something to them, and you can't argue with the success of Skull and Bones.
True. Famous alums include senators John Kerry and John Chafee, to name 2, cabinet secretaries such as Averell Harriman, and 3 presidents, William Taft, George Bush, and George W. Bush, who's been reluctant to talk about Skull and Bones.
Does it still exist? The thing is so secret, I'm not even sure it still exists.
In recent years, by many accounts, the on-campus influence and allure of Skull and Bones has waned dramatically, and there is no proof that the rituals recently caught on videotape are the same ones performed by the current president. Still, Rosenbaum says the tape is a valuable artifact, an extremely rare view into the secret society that groomed the American ruling class for generations. Dan Harris, ABC News, New York.
That's our report on World News Tonight. Don't forget Nightline. And
in fact, George Bush's family is full of Skull and Bones men, including his dad, George Herbert Walker, and his grandfather, Prescott. W. Bush also appointed 10 members of the elite clique to his administration. And check out how Kerry and Bush both responded when asked about the secret society in which they are brothers by the late Tim Russert of Meet the Press.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go wild.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
As strange as their response is to any questioning about the uber-exclusive fraternity, what's even stranger is the rituals they perform inside. According to The Scotsman, a Scottish newspaper, initiates must masturbate in a coffin while recounting their sexual exploits, for which they will be rewarded with a no-strings-attached gift of $15,000. Wow, masturbating in a coffin must have been pretty awkward for Bush if his dad was present. Although little else is known about what goes on inside the tomb, it's widely reported that members, including George W.'s grandpappy, grave robbed the famous Native American Apache leader Geronimo, taking his skull and some of his bones. As if the Trail of Tears and genocide of Native Americans wasn't offensive enough, these rich mofos actually have bragged about desecrating his grave and doing God knows what with his skull. Vile. Sadly, the descendants of Geronimo have been trying to get his remains back for years and have actually filed a lawsuit against Skull and Bones on the 100th anniversary of his death. But the appeal fell on deaf ears, and Skull and Bones came out victorious. According to Yale Daily News, officials cannot be forced to permit Geronimo's descendants to remove his remains and relocate them. because apparently it's perfectly okay to steal dead bodies as long as you never give them back. And if you know anything about Native American tradition, then you know how offensive it is to trap the spirit of Geronimo in such a dark and disturbing place. See, while this may seem like mere sensational fodder for tabloids, this type of behavior is actually indicative of the way the uber elite view the rest of us peons and their role in society. Because hoarding the world's wealth and controlling the political process just isn't enough unless you can brag about it to your naked coffin buddies.
You've said that both George W. Bush and his father had anal sex with 100 men. How do you know that?
Because they are part of the well-known fraternal group out of Yale University known as Skull and Bones. And it's public knowledge that the Skull and Bones organization, in order to be initiated, first of all, you had to lie in a casket and let men urinate on you. And then a part of the process, you had to stand in a circular, if you will, masturbation squad to be a part of Skull and Bones. And then you also had to be penetrated by the elder persons in Skull and Bones. Everybody knows this as public knowledge. And George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. are bona fide members of Skull and Bones. That means they have been penetrated by at least 100 men in their anus area.
And how do you know that it's 100? Might it have been 95?
Yeah, it could have been less, but generally that's the number that kind of gets the attention of everybody.
And if it could have been fewer, it could have been none also, right?
No, it could not have been none. It could not have been none, no. And because Skull and Bones will not accept you without that practice. It's hideous, but that's what they do. That's what these fraternities do. Some do even worse than that. But yes, George Bush has been penetrated by other men and has also been doused in semen of other men. While he lie in a casket, other men have masturbated in his face.
Sounds like quite an evening.
Knowledge, a word of prophecy, and I want you preaching. Behold, like you have never, ever seen before. Now, what's it going to be? What's it going to be?
If you've never heard of the terms legal fiction, or straw man, then what you're about to learn is something that sounds so astonishing that it couldn't possibly be true. If I were to tell you that paying your tax, getting a driver's license, registering your car, paying fines, and attending court are all optional and that you are conned into agreeing with them, what would you think? It has been said that you need to know that you're in a cage before you can escape from that cage. Let's look into how you're being tricked and how your power is being hidden from you.
Ah, the government. It loves you and wants to keep you safe and well. It even wants to make paying taxes, fines, and court costs easier for you. How? Well, you'll need to meet your straw man.
Your straw man is a fictitious legal entity created at your birth through your birth certificate and the registration of that birth.
Here is a definition of straw man. A front, a third party who is put up in name only to take part in a transaction. Nominal party to a transaction. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. The term is also used in commercial and property contexts when a transfer is made to a party. The straw man, simply for the purpose of retransferring to the transferor in order to accomplish some purpose not otherwise permitted. Barron's, 3rd edition. The straw man is an artificial person. The straw man was created by law shortly after you were born via the registration of the application for your birth certificate. The name for the straw man is your name in all capital letters. You will notice that the inscription on the birth certificate in your name is in all capital letters. The English language has precise rules of grammar that make no provision for writing proper nouns in all capital letters. So your name spelled with all capital letters is a fictitious name.
Whenever a human being is born, there's two entities. One is the real entity, which is the human being, the flesh and blood, and the other is a legal fiction, a fictional entity that is nothing more than a piece of paper, the birth certificate. Again, we're duped into believing that these are one in the same, and so we're tricked into representing the legal fiction, the straw man, that birth certificate. So when people get fines and things like that, it's actually consulting the legal fiction, the non-existent entity, the corporate entity that is owned by corporations.
You have any interactions with the bureaucracy, okay? They're not interacting with you, they're actually interacting with your legal fiction, because they can't deal with a flesh and blood human. Yeah, they have to deal with another corporation.
When you start to break down the words that we use and you start to look at the roots of all these words and you actually look at where these words, what these words actually really mean, you start to get an idea of what's going on. The word corporation is very, very specific because it's corp and oration, it's dead speak. So a corporation is something that's dead. It's an entity that exists only in a legal framework. It doesn't exist in any other framework at all. It only becomes an entity through legal mechanisms and legal means.
In essence, when you were born and far too young to understand, a company with your name was created through your birth certificate. When your parents registered your birth, they actually created a company and handed ownership of that company and you over to the state. It is important to remember that your parents were tricked and had no idea this was happening. This is why the state can take children from their families and it not be classed as kidnapping.
This is where it all began. This is the foundation document. All identification is generated from this document. And these didn't exist before 1933. These only came into being in 1933 when they hatched this plan. They created a corporate fiction with a name just like yours. In doing this, they registered and monetized the spirit and soul of a living being. My name is spelt in all capitals here. So's yours, so's your driver's license, your health card, anything you get from the government, your name is spelt in all capital letters. And when you use any government identification, you are identifying yourself as a corporation, and you are existing within the jurisdiction of corporate law. And just because you didn't know what you're doing, that's no excuse. It doesn't exonerate you from liability. There was a bankruptcy in 1933, and the central bankers came in and said, we have a mechanism whereby you can continue to conduct commerce even though you're bankrupt and there's no money. Pledge your citizens as collateral. That happened in 1933, the bankruptcy. And that, by no coincidence, is why these started to be issued in 1933. So you may be walking around thinking you're free and you have rights. But the bottom line is that you are owned, you're a chattel, you are a slave. And these people own you. And that's why they can do things to you against your will. Because you comply.
Right now I'm going to just read a quote from Edward Mendell House and what he had to say in a private meeting with Woodrow Wilson, president between 1913 and 1921, from the private papers of Woodrow Wilson. Quote, very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever by operation of law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivered the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given commercial value designated to keep us a profit that will be none the wiser. For not one man in a million could ever figure out our plans, and if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and pledges. This will inevitably reap us huge profits beyond our wildest of expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the President as our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. Having established plausible deniability, even if people become enlightened that they had a remedy and pursued it, the attorneys, judges, and legislators could claim that they did not understand the people's claims, especially if the technical requirements for achieving it were not followed pursuant to statutory requirements. Requiring the public schools to teach civics, government, and history classes out of federally approved, politically correct textbooks written by the publishing houses, owned by the owners of the Federal Reserve, would assure that the people would not discover the remedy for a long time, if ever.